How we doing, everybody? It's Wardy here, and as you guys can see, we're back at it breaking down all the latest news and rumblings in Mets land. And today is a January 2nd Friday edition at the time this video first dropping. Rest assured, if actual breaking news or things of great substance comes out over the next couple days, even though I'll be out of town, I'll make sure that we cover it live in real time while I'm on the prowl doing my thing outside of my normal setup here. But in today's show, we have plenty to get into, and it's headlined by the fact that, surprise absolutely nobody, the Mets are still in the markets for top free agents Kyle Tucker, Cody Bellinger, Framber, Valdez, and Ranger Suarez. The great question is, to what degree, as I'm sure they are varying from one player to the other. We're going to get into not only where this reporting stems from over the past 24 to 48 hours, especially after Tatsuya Imai has landed with the Houston Astros on that 3-year, $60+ million contract, but we'll get into how that contract may inevitably impact the market for the other top starters available, and Valdez, Suarez, and others in particular. We're going to talk plenty on comparing and contrasting guys like Tucker, Bellinger, who makes more sense, but ultimately, who is more realistic for this club at this point in time? That and much more is what we're going to deep dive, folks. So sit back, relax, and get yourself ready for the ride, which is our latest breakdown here on WardyNYM. All I ask is that you guys hit that like and subscribe button on your way in, as it's a fantastic way to support the platform. Help us get to 37,000 subscribers, where we will be giving away another jersey to one lucky sub. Gets a brand new Mets jersey of whatever player they want on the roster. Of course, that may still have yet to materialize as they have more moves to be had, but rest assured, help us get our next sub goal. I greatly appreciate that. Let me know all your thoughts and discourse in the comments down below. And shout out to today's video sponsor at Sleeper, that has you covered for everything here in the sports fantasy space. As you guys see beside me, I have my NFL picks for this weekend, and we're going with the four-headed monster, headlined by Caleb Williams, doing a tremendous job there with Chicago, leading them to that division title this year. So exciting for those Bears fans, and I think the Bears are going to keep it up big time with their offense in their final game of the year, this time against the Detroit Lions club, which is no longer making playoffs. Now, the Lions, of course, are going to try to play spoiler, but I think Caleb Williams is going to have a big game nonetheless. Mike Evans, who's been out a good chunk of the year with injury, which is why for the first time in his career, he's not going to have a 1,000-yard season, but he's going to finish the year strong for a Bucs team that certainly needs it in their matchup against the Panthers. I'm taking him over on yards there with at least 57 or more. We got the youngster and show there, who's been doing an awesome job as potentially the Rookie of the Year candidate for the Saints. He's looking to continue the winning ways for New Orleans, as he will go over on yards, in my opinion, at least 230 or more. And Jaylen Warren, my dog from the Pittsburgh Steelers, as a Steelers fan, a bloodbath to see who will not only make playoffs, but who will not make playoffs in that finale against the Ravens. I'm taking over on the yards for him to get at least 50 or more. If you guys like what you see, make sure to check out our awesome friends here at Sleeper. Get a 100% match up to $100 by utilizing our promo code HMA, which is linked down below in the description. Again, that is promo code HMA to get a 100% match up to $100 for everything you want in the sports fantasy space. Alright, folks, let's hop right into this, and let's begin with the first topic today. And I wanted to do something a little bit different, a little miscellaneous, but I still find it as a interesting conversation to start, and that is with what you guys can see beside me. The Washington Nationals officially hired former Mets hitting coach Jeremy Barnes to be their director of base running, gameplay, and defense. So kind of in a similar role to what Kai Correa is now for the New York Mets. But as you guys can see from my quote here and my reaction, I think that tells you all you need to know. How fitting is it that Jeremy Barnes not only stays in the division, just like Jeremy Hefner, just like Antoine Richardson, this time not the Braves, but the Washington Nationals, a Nationals club that's poached some really smart guys from the Mets front office to be in upgraded roles for their newly appointed front office that they've, of course, built from the ground up over the past number of months. But Barnes here, who was the Mets hitting coach, co-hitting coach, really going all the way back to the 2022 season or so with Eric Chavez, now we see that he is not even going to be in an official hitting role for the Washington Nationals. So how fitting is it that the guy that was a key factor in the Mets' lack of consistent hitting with their approach over the number of years, not necessarily all the pressure on him, but more so on maybe how he and Eric Chavez simply did not get together well. You know, this wasn't a pairing that was like, oh, you have some absolutely delicious pasta with a fine wine. We're looking at a match that simply was far from made in heaven. Chavez has said that point blank as departure from the Mets after what was a failed 2025 season with the lack of consistency with the Mets offense. This surprised absolutely nobody. So So just want to start off today's conversation by just acknowledging how fitting is it that, we see a guy that was literally one of the key deciders for the Mets hitting approach the past 2.5, 3 years, and he doesn't get hired for an official hitting role with a lesser club, even though the Nationals, you could argue, may be a better team on paper than the Mets right now. And I say that loosely, obviously, given the Mets' amount of holes that they still need to address this offseason. Let me know your thoughts about that in the comments down below. But let's begin today's discussion by talking more on a pitcher that I've been very divisive on when it comes to my thoughts and opinions on that. You guys even saw in our live stream over the past day or so, and that's regarding Ranger Suarez. As you guys can see here, shout out to my guy, Bavarian Sports Fan on X, awesome Mets follow. He does a very good job on just pretty much taking all the key meat of details that you want from respective articles that have dropped solely regarding the New York Mets. And he states the following: Ranger Suarez, like Valdez, Suarez has been linked to the Mets and Orioles throughout the winter. This has also been reaffirmed in a piece that came out over the past day from John Heyman of the New York Post that the Mets are linked to Ranger as well. We've talked about Ranger Suarez as he's been linked to the Mets going back a number of weeks ago, back when Kyle Schwarber was still available in the free agent market, which is hardly a surprise given their respective needs for starting pitching. Feinstein mentioned Suarez is 2 years younger than Valdez, which makes him more appealing for teams. And I would say that you could argue that, yeah, Ranger Suarez is maybe more appealing for teams depending on the type of contract length that you're doing. And he has better peripherals on what he's immediately giving you. However, he doesn't have the innings nor the consistent workload that Framber Valdez absolutely curb stomps in comparison. That's why I do believe Valdez is still without a doubt the more attractive piece, even if you have to land these guys on short-term contracts. I know the larger concern with both Valdez and Suarez has a lot more to do on inking these guys to contracts beyond, say, 3 years, when you have a Ranger Suarez, so you see the numbers down below. There's not much to complain about there, and I'm not saying that there should be much to complain about there. With 3.2 ERA and just over 3.1 expected ERA, respectable FIP, we're looking at 151 strikeouts, but that doesn't tell the whole story for Suarez, because while you see a lot of great detail in his arsenal, again, he has been dominant for the Phillies the last couple of years, there's two glaring things that stick out. I said this in my live stream last, and I'll say it again. I want you guys to figure out what exactly that is before I say it, though, so go ahead and let me know if you have it right in the comments. But we see the good: 90th percentile in pitching run value, 88th in breaking run value, 90th in off-speed run value, 84th in expected ERA, 70th in expected batting average, 95th in average exit velocity, 78th in chase percentage, 86th in walk percentage, 89th in barrel percentage, 98th in hard hit percentage, 76th in ground ball percentage, a little bit below league average in extension, but that's okay. And then you see K percentage above league average ever so slightly in the 55th percentile. This is out of 100. If you're 100, you're the best in baseball. If you're 1, you're the worst in baseball, for context. But then we have the 7th percentile in average exit in fastball velocity. And this is where I really want to start the conversation, okay? Two things can be true. Ranger Suarez has been a very solid pitcher in the heart of that rotation for the Phillies for basically the past half decade. What's also true is that Ranger's had a lot of success while providing a lack of innings, because he's more of a 5-and-dive starter than he is a guy that can give you consistently 7+ innings, like a Sandy Alcantara via trade can most certainly do for you, or even a Zach Gallen, who's more of an appetite to give you more consistent innings throughout his career, at least what we've seen of recent track records. So you look at that, but you look at the fact that his fastball is currently sitting not even in confidence at 91 miles per hour. That's a major bugaboo for any team that's looking to invest in pitching. And this is where I have my greatest divide with someone like Ranger Suarez. I find him appealing. There's a lot to like when you look at the arsenal. He has a sinker, the changeup, the cutter, the curveball, the four seam, and the slider. A lot of things I'm sure Justin Willard, newly appointed Mets pitching coach, can work with. But between the lack of velocity on a fastball that can absolutely get cooked if he starts to regress a little bit heading into his age 31 season, and knowing that this is not a profile that at all is warranted of giving a contract beyond, I would say, 3 years, regardless of his age and status. I don't think there's much to justify giving Ranger Suarez a 4+ year contract. I think if you give him anything, similar beyond like for example, a couple years ago when he signed with the Phillies, a Taijuan Walker deal, even Sean Manaea, 3 years, $75 million, that's more in the realm of what I think Suarez should be getting. And Suarez is going to look for at least $100 million. I understand he's going to look for that bag, especially after seeing someone like Tatsuya Imai get north of 60 when he hasn't even toed the rubber at the bigs yet. But given the lack of consistent innings that Ranger Suarez provides for you, and knowing that he's a soft tossing southpaw, I just look at the configuration in this Mets rotation. I'm left wondering, how much do the Mets need a profile like this? You have David Pearson, who in the first half of 2025 and for all of 2024 from June on when he returned from his hip surgery that prior offseason, was dominant on giving the Mets consistent innings of 6 or 7 or even at times 8 innings of work, which was tremendous for a rotation that otherwise didn't get it. Sean Manaea gave you quality innings in the second half that we saw of 2024 especially, but in 2025 was a shell of himself due to the oblique injury, the loose spot in his elbow that he did not have surgery on this offseason, which I really don't know if I like that. Probably will not like that in the end. That tends to be the case when it comes to the Mets and their pitchers having ailments that they're trying to play through essentially without surgery. Manaea and Peterson are two guys that aren't known for their velocity and are somewhat similar profiles to Suarez, where, like them at their best isn't far off from what you're getting Ranger Suarez. I think Suarez is the best guaranteed thing of the group and what you're getting on a consistent start, but he is not the best guaranteed thing when it comes to innings, nor is he a guaranteed thing for someone who is going to probably not age well as he continues to get older. So I think the Mets are in a bit of a logjam with the rotation status right now, given the current lefty options they have there. And that is why, as much as I don't think Ranger Suarez is the worst thing imaginable to go after and try to land, I don't really view him as necessarily the most attractive fit either, because yes, on one hand, you'd be prying him away from the Philadelphia Phillies, but a Phillies club that might not have much of Wheeler, if at all, next season, and would be losing Ranger Suarez, you don't think that they would do their best abilities to upgrade their rotation? You don't think that the Mets, say, sign someone like Ranger Suarez, that they'd be more inclined to either bring in a Zach Gallen, who is a South Jersey native, may have grew up a Phillies fan for all we know, or a Framber Valdez, who I think is a more guaranteed thing than what you're getting, because while Valdez's numbers maybe don't jump off the board as much as Suarez, the amount of innings and the dominance that has been brought with Valdez during his tenure with the Astros, in my opinion, trumps what has currently been the case here with the Phillies. And if there is one clear thing to give big devil's advocate for in the case of the Phillies, even though that they haven't had great, valiant, deep playoff runs over the years, when Suarez has been called upon in playoffs, he has been absolutely nails. So this would be a pickup that you're not only doing for the immediate success that you get in the regular season, but someone who could really be dynamic for you come postseason play. And that is where I think Ranger Suarez deserves most flowers and credit when we break down him and the type of profile that he is. So Mets fans, I definitely would love to hear from you guys. Are you for or against a potential Ranger Suarez pursuit? As we know, the Mets have been linked to him, but linkage versus active talks versus actually pen to paper signing are all different things. And that's why you will continue to see us break down many players this offseason, but very few will actually land with the club in the end. That's just the nature of the beast, how these things go. God willing, the Mets will land players that we're satisfied and happy with in the end from both the free agent and trade market. But until that is really in our front of our face with certainty, we're going to continue to have questions for better or most certainly for worse as of late under the David Stearns regime. But regarding Suarez and everything else in between there, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Because now, guys, going on from Ranger Suarez, I think it's only fitting that we go on from talking about one southpaw to another, because as it was mentioned, the New York Mets have continued to have interest in Framber Valdez. That's been reaffirmed through Mark Feinsand. That's been reaffirmed through Heyman, among others. The Mets have been long linked to Framber Valdez. So this is something that should be far from a shocking conversation. And I'm not going to be long-winded regarding Framber because we already broke him down more extensively in our live stream the past day or so on the Tots What You My signing, as all eyes are now on Framber. But just to touch on him briefly, again, just to compare and contrast what I find more attractive about Valdez between the two, even if you're signing both, let's say they both are getting the hypothetical 3-year contract with maybe a 4th-year option, or at worst a 4th year with a 5th-year option, something along those lines, because I don't think either is going to get a contract of, say, 5 or 6 years. I could be wrong. We'll see how much that holds true in the end, but I think the Dylan Cease 7-year contract will be more of an anomaly that we take away from this free agent class, barring changes. Though, Framber Valdez, while he doesn't have as sexy of an ERA, still in the 3s, but not as good as Suarez this past year. And we're looking at a FIP, which is around the same as Suarez. We're looking at a WHIP that isn't terrible. The K to walk ratio isn't terrible. A 4-WAR year, which Valdez has consistently done each of the past 3-4 seasons now for the Astros, and what is really a bandbox. And yes, I've seen your comments. Thank you guys for correcting me. It's not a batter's box, it's a bandbox. And you're 100% right. I'm just so used to saying batter's box, not because of the physical batter's box, but I just associate, greater offensive rates of home runs with the Phillies, with the Astros, with any dome for that matter, with the Reds, and then the list goes on from there. I've always called it a batter's box, even though I understand that is not technically correct, so my apologies. But Framber Valdez, he just brings a couple things. One, he beat Ranger Suarez in the World Series a couple years ago, and I think that is something very important to note, because if you're viewing these guys in similar classes, in my opinion, you want the guy that has had more of the immediate success, not both just with player performance, but on actually getting over the hump to win a championship. Thankfully, the Mets have that in Juan Soto and other aspects of their club, and Marcus Semien, who was the captain of the Rangers in 2023 when they defied the odds and had their amazing run. But besides that, the Mets really don't have a lot of true winners in this organization at the moment. Valdez would find himself as one of the few in said category. So I think that alone is very attractive about Valdez. I also think what's obviously attractive about Valdez is that this is someone who has been a Cy Young-worthy pitcher like Suarez in stretches, but also has had clear dominance in postseason play. I mean, we have seen him absolutely look brilliant for the Astros in some of the deep playoff runs that they've had over the past half decade, and that should not be understated. Nor should it be understated that Valdez has consistently been a guy providing north of 200 innings each of the past 3 years in ways that Ranger Suarez simply has not done. Suarez has fallen far more in the category of being a 150-inning guy, and that 50-inning gap is significant for a Mets rotation that if they had 50 innings more from a starter of quality, like even a Noel McLean if he was called up sooner, they probably make playoffs in the end. That's really all it came down to for them. So those are clear things I look at as distinctions and say I like more Framber. I know that Framber maybe will have starts that don't look as impressive as someone like Ranger Suarez, but I think the ceiling is still greater for Framber Valdez than what you're getting right now. And the floor, while the floor you could argue might be more in the hand of Ranger Suarez over the past couple of years on really being consistent as a 5 and dime, Valdez's ability to go 6, 7, or 8 innings for you on any given day is very important, and that furthers what separates himself from the rest of the group, in my opinion. And just to touch on this again, as you guys can see from the Baseball Savant numbers, yeah, they're not as sexy as Ranger Suarez. Just to compare and contrast, that's Ranger, which looks a lot more impressive, and then here's Framber. But again, if there's one thing that we know, Mets fans, is that you don't need to have the sexiest Baseball Savant page to have success either. I think David Peterson and his awesome stretch from June returning from his hip surgery for the remainder of the year was evident of exactly that. Peterson has never been a expected numbers, analytics, or savant darling throughout his entire career. Yeah, he's defied the odds with his approach, especially his ability to go deep in creative ways. Valdez doesn't even really have bad numbers here. The only thing that I don't like out of all this is just two things, and they go hand in hand: average exit velocity and hard hit percentage, right? He's one of the worst starters in baseball in that regard. So like anything else, if Valdez is going to be handing pitches, he's going to get barreled. Color me shocked. But the good thing, though, is that if you go from pitching half a season in a bandbox like what you have there in Houston to going to Citi Field and very much so being a pitcher-friendly ballpark, I'm inclined to believe that those rates should hopefully start to go down. The home run rates may go a little bit lower for him as well, even with him already, I think, having peaked in his career. And I think just being in a different environment where the pitching is far more dominated at times at Citi Field than the offense can only bode him well should the Mets actually make this move happen. So will the Mets land someone like this who's an elite ground ball pitcher, the 97th percentile, which would really bode well for guys like Marcus Semien, Francisco Lindor, and whoever else the Mets build in this infield outside of Jorge Polanco, to be determined. But the sinker, the curveball, the changeup, the slider, forcing very similar arsenal to Ranger Suarez, just a little bit different in makeup, and obviously their consistency of innings and the fastball velocity for Framber. We're looking at 4 miles per hour higher on average, okay? That's notable for Framber, who can go anywhere from 94 to 97 plus on the gun in ways where you're going to have more of an issue with Ranger Suarez just giving you anything of significance velocity-wise. If he loses his craftiness as a very crafty southpaw pitcher, he will lose everything. And while I don't think that he's going to fall off a cliff next year, I think if you had to take a Framber Valdez at, let's see, 190 innings for the Mets next season, giving you at least 30 starts and also giving you an ERA of, let's go with 3.68, and the expected numbers are eerily similar. And that also helps the Mets get the innings that they need to not only make sure that they lock playoffs, but actually have a fairly stable rotation heading into postseason play when it comes to innings eaten. Or would you guys prefer Ranger Suarez, more around 150 to 160 innings, may have an ERA more close to just 3 flat, but isn't really going to have a whole lot else that's necessarily going to separate himself as much than Valdez. He might have a greater floor, but I do think Framber's ceiling is still greater between the two, just from what we've seen and known to this point. So you guys let me know, between Framber Valdez and Ranger Suarez, who is more attractive for you for this Mets rotation? Should they sign either of the two on a contract in a 3 to 5 year window? I don't foresee the Mets signing any of these guys on a contract really 5 years plus, but I don't think that they're going to for certain fall in that category until we see reports to refute or suggest otherwise, which may happen, but that's not what's happening now at the time of this video being recorded on January 2nd of 2026. So now going on for Framber Valdez, everybody. I think that's enough talk on the pitching for now. If you guys want to hear more on guys like Zach Gallen, Sandy Alcantara, make sure you check out the back half of my Tots What You My breaking news live segment that we did a day ago on the platform, getting into all eyes on Framber Valdez and what is next for the Mets as an organizational whole. But going on from Valdez, let's get into our next topic in this one. Our next topic in this one is going to be as follows, everybody. And just to reiterate what you guys see in Framber right there, the Orioles have been connected to Valdez, as has been the case with the Mets. And I think the Orioles have as just of a good a shot to land Valdez, if not greater than the Mets. It really will just all come down to, I think, preference and the ability to spend versus lack thereof. But one thing that I thought was important, and shout out again to Bavarian Sports Fan for knowing this from Mark Feinstein of MLB, is that another knows that both Mike Elias and David Stearns were in the Houston Astros front office together when Valdez was initially signed in 2015. So these are two guys that already have a rapport and familiarity with Framber Valdez. At the time, David Stearns was the assistant GM with the Astros. I'm not exactly sure what Elias's role was in that front office, but still a significant role nonetheless for the Astros as they were just embarking on their beginning of their dynasty, essentially. Cheating scandal and all, and then without the cheating scandal. But nonetheless, will be interesting to see which former Astros exec is the winner in the end, if at all. Or will this be another circumstance where breaking news, Framber Valdez signs with like the Atlanta Braves, the Philadelphia Phillies, again, a club that hasn't really been much linked this offseason, but it's still in the market for pitching. The Padres have been connected to Valdez as well. Like, who knows how crazy Preller's going to get, even with the Mets having had trade talks there, to be determined. But as we go on from him, let's get into our next one here, and that is going to be, as you guys can see, in Cody Bellinger. And as we know, the Mets have been among the teams most often connected to Bellinger, and after trading Brandon Nimmo and Jeff McNeil, the need for an outfielder or two is clear. People also believe that the two sides, Bellinger and Yankees, will ultimately come together. Now, it doesn't just stop here with Mark Feinstein's piece. It also is noted that we saw through John Heyman, the New York Post, with his piece they came out with over the past 24 hours or so, is that the Yankees are looking to potentially get creative with their money. Not only are they potentially shopping at the moment, listening to offers of Jazz Chisholm, which is really interesting to say the least. I'm not overly surprised because Jazz feels too extroverted of a personality for the Yankees to want to deal with, because not that Jazz is doing anything wrong, but we know how white-collared and buttoned up the Yanks still continue to be, regardless of them getting rid of their beard removal rule, thanks to Devin Williams, which is hilarious when we think about it in hindsight. But a couple of things were noted regarding Bellinger. It was noted from John Heyman, among others, that the Yankees have actually put in an offer already for Cody Bellinger. And we've also seen this standstill where the Yankees really aren't moving off of their offer because they're not going to bid against themselves. So for people that give flack to David Stearns for basically being that same scenario, color me shocked. Every other team does the exact same thing for the most part in negotiations. But there's still a standstill, even while Bellinger has an offer. So is Belly going to go back to the Yankees, or is he going to fall into the Mets' lap? Because the one thing I will say is that if the Bellinger sweepstakes conclude, and let's say he goes to the Yankees or maybe goes back to the Dodgers, because I do think it'll be one of those destinations, if it's not, say, the Blue Jays or the Angels, who I believe are more on the outside looking in and said sweepstakes. I think they're more fallback options depending on the circumstance, even though Artie Moreno's an idiot. I might just give him my bag. No one else is even coming close to. Still, Bellinger is one of these guys that obviously makes a lot of sense for the Mets. But is this a guarantee to happen? Obviously, that's to be determined. I just don't want it to be a circumstance where we find out that Bellinger signs with the Yankees or the Dodgers or whoever, and this was getting back to my initial point, that we come to find out in the end through multiple reports that the Mets were never even heavily involved in his market. Because that would be factually incorrect from what's been widely reported all offseason long, but would also further show you just how obnoxious and contradicting the reporting can be, to the point where there's literally no point of even having certain discussions regarding the rumors and rumblings of players. And you can make that argument now already, but I'm saying that would obviously be of greater magnitude than ever if that holds true. You know, there were a lot of people that thought that the Mets were going to be putting in a valiant effort to bring back Pete Alonso, and they never even gave him a formal offer. So again, just a lot of contradiction from what the fan point of view and what's been reported versus what actual reality ends up being. So that's why you have to take a lot of things with a grain of salt. But Bellinger has been an obvious fit for the New York Mets for literally as long as time now. We have talked about him since the start of the offseason. You guys see the numbers beside me. I'm not going to rattle them all off. He's just elite when it comes to base running, batting value, fielding value, a little bit below league average with his hitting approach from exit velocities. However, elite with his approach when looking at whiff and K percentage and those things. We know that Bellinger's bat is not going to be as consistent as his glove the next couple years, but if he's still a bat that can be anywhere from 25 home runs to 80 plus RBIs a season while giving you anywhere anywhere from, I think, a 3.5 to a 4.5 plus WAR. That's good value for the player that you're investing in. It just comes down to the years. You know, the Mets obviously, I'm sure, don't want to go to 6 years, or they probably don't even want to go to 5 for Bellinger, but that's where there's a lot of great uncertainty. What kind of year contract is Bellinger going to land in the end? Because, you know, when we compare and contrast Bellinger and Tucker, I've always felt this way. I think Bellinger is more realistic than Tucker, not because of the Yankees, but more so because of just the player profile right now. And we'll conclude today's show by talking about Kyle Tucker and why I would love him on the Mets still, and where that reporting stems from, but doesn't change the fact that who would bring more immediate versatility? Some of that Mets VP of Baseball Ops and assistant GM, Mr. Brazula, noted with local Spanish media over the past 48 hours that the Mets are in the market for guys that have immense versatility and can help them in various ways. Bellinger, who can play an elite outfield in left, center, or right on any given day, and first base, is what separates himself from the next closest. And the next closest in versatility is Kazuma Okamoto. And Okamoto is going to have to sign with a club in the next 24 to 48 hours before January 2nd. I'm not getting my hopes up on that being the New York Mets. Robert Murray of Fansided noted that he thinks it'll be a surprise team that lands him, but I think that surprise team may honestly be a team like the San Diego Padres, if anything, that are, you know, in the market and have done good work in the MPB and the KBO over the past number of years that have kept very good overseas relationships. So maybe that happens. I'm not entirely sure, but Bellinger has always felt like a certainty, a lock for this club, because even if you brought Alonso back, he made logical sense if you traded Nemo, and that's what the Mets did. And especially now that Alonso isn't here, it just makes too much sense to give time in the outfield, give time at first, ship Polanco to DH when he's not at first, get very creative about the development of Carson Bench and how he is going to pan out in the outfield, which could go in hand with having Bellinger either more at center or more at left. He just brings you endless possibilities in ways that very few other players bring you. And is this a circumstance where Bellinger checks off so many boxes that, you know, we're going to get our hopes up as fans because the Mets aren't going to be involved as market in the end? It's going to be the complete flip-flop. I don't know. It shouldn't be that way, but anything can happen any offseason. The Yankees are going to be absolutely adamant in making sure that he doesn't get prided to the Bronx, to the Queens. But rest assured, if Cody Bellinger does not go back to the Yankees or the Dodgers, I do think he will be in the New York Mets uniform. The only way that doesn't happen again is if the Blue Jays really go all out, and that's obviously a very appealing destination that the Mets can't compete with when based on immediate recent success, and a team that's in a greater win-now position to win than the Mets are, obviously. Or it's the Angels, because Artie Moreno is literally so thick-headed. He's the type of guy to say, oh, you know what? We actually need like a whole rotation to build. I'm saying more so in recent years than maybe current day, but still holds true to a degree. Oh, yeah, you know all the team need? Let's go ahead and add someone that's far from a team need. That's been the case with him. And even though the Angels have room for an outfielder, you know, that's where I think maybe Belly gets a bag and kind of goes in the sunset. Does he really get a 7-year contract, you know, north of $200 million with the Angels and calls it a day? If it happens, good for him. I'm sure that he wouldn't hate that idea, but he would lose being a contender for playoffs probably for an extended period of time, potentially the remainder of his career. So jury's still out as to what happens with Cody Bellinger, but between him and Kyle Tucker, undoubtedly, I do believe that Bellinger is still the better immediate fit. Bellinger doesn't have as high of a ceiling offensively, but his floor defensively and base running wise, I just think he brings plenty for you that I know the Mets would be happy and content with to really help have that be a headlining move for them and then really bolster the pitching in ways that we know that they need to. Now, outside of Bellinger, let's get into, last but not least here, on one Kyle Tucker, and let's get into where the Tucker reporting has stemmed from. And as you guys can see here, and this is a multi-parter, the Mets have checked in on Kyle Tucker. It's also been reaffirmed from other reporters through MLB that the Mets have been widely connected throughout Tucker throughout the offseason, even though it's varied to degrees. Robert Murray Fansided said that while he believes that the Toronto Blue Jays are still kind of, you know, the favorites, and that's kind of been the consensus among John Heyman, Mark Feinsand, and others, because the Blue Jays are the only reported team that we know that Tucker checked out the facilities for. I'm sure he has with others, we just don't know it publicly, and that means the reporters either don't know it or they're not allowed to put it out yet because there's certain reasons for it because of how the market is being played through the agents and other things. But Tucker has been connected for the Mets for a while, but And the one thing that we saw from Robert Murray fan-sided is that you can't count out a team like the Mets in this. And Murray is the same person who we discussed a couple weeks ago on, giving us a belief that the Mets are very well a favorite for Kyle Tucker, which I still don't think is far off from reality. I think as reporting continues to happen this offseason, you're going to see the Mets further connected to Kyle Tucker. Until he makes his decision, you're going to see the Mets right in the thick of things. Whether they land him or not, of course, is a different discussion, but the talks between Tucker and the Mets, I'm sure, are going to only heat up moving forward. And the Robert Murray thing was interesting from what happened a couple weeks ago, because he had, for those that don't know, he had basically a paid Discord chat that baseball fans could chime into for paying a certain amount of fee, whatever it was, and he would do like a paid Q&A essentially over text. And a fan asked him verbatim, who are the finalists for Tucker, or is it too early to say? And he said the finalists were the Dodgers, the Blue Jays, and the Mets. Now, not long after that, he took not only the message down, but he deleted the Discord entirely because he was not happy. That I would assume he wasn't happy, but I could be wrong. This is just me speculating here, given how the track record looked, that he wasn't overly satisfied to see people screenshot that and then post it on X and other social media, because that's fairly significant to hear someone of Robert Murray's status just casually throwing those teams out there, because we know he's very well connected and was the initial person who broke the news early in December that Kyle Tucker was at the Blue Jays facility. So I think Kyle Tucker is in a very unique position right now, where you have teams that are giving him absurdly high AV contracts and shorter term deals, where it could be more of a route where he gets opt-outs and that he hits the market again a year from now, kind of like an Alex Bregman. But I'm also under the belief that I think Tucker is going to get some of the years he's looking for. I think Kyle is going to get at least in the 6-year category and at most at 10. I know that 4 years is a significant gap for a guy entering his age 29 season. There's just so much uncertainty with Kyle. Is he going to get at least 8 of $300 million? Is he going to get 9 of, $330? Is he going to get, or is he going to get 10 of the $350, $360 range? Will there be added incentives and, bonuses or, deferrals that could get it north of $400 million? Because Tucker, before he was traded to the Cubs, I really thought he was going to be getting at minimum $400 million once the free agent market, because he's such an unbelievably balanced outfielder in the game. Isn't as defensively sound as Bellinger, but he's such a valuable, well-rounded player, especially with his ceiling. He could be as good as 70+% above league average when evaluating batters. Like, that's immense value. And we're also looking at a World Series champion, a multi-time champ during his time with the Astros, if I'm not mistaken. So Tucker brings everything that you want when it comes to being a winner, a team leader, still in the prime of his career, but he's going to cost an absurdly pretty penny because of that. And as you guys can see from the savant numbers beside me, a lot to love with him and his approach. The only thing that isn't as jumping out on you is the 25th percentile in outs above average. The arm value and strength is good. But if you look at the 2024 season, he was above league average defensively. He was actually in the 60th percentile that year. If you look at the 2023 season, he went all the way to 10th. So really depends as to where he's in the outfield, how he's utilized, and the amount of game play that he gets, because he also did have a much smaller sample size in 2024 due to injury than what he had in 2025, mind you. But this is a guy who has fluctuated with his defensive value. Again, 2022, we're looking at a Kyle Tucker that was in the 87th percentile in outs above average. So I don't think his defense has massively fallen off a cliff. It's just a matter of how much can that be recouped and how consistent can that be on a fairly long-term deal. Like, how good can it be for the next 5 years at minimum, assuming that Tucker will be on at least an 8-year contract, and you worry about those final 3-4 years once you get there. It's those 5. This is a window essentially where if you're replacing Brandon Nimmo, this is what you would replace Brandon Nimmo with. A player who's at least 4 years younger. That alone is very appealing, but has the upside that Tucker does, as not only an elite bat with tremendous eye at the plate, but also someone who has just everything that you want in a true champion. I mean, 98th percentile in chase percentage, 96th in walk percentage, well above league average in XWOBA, a guy who can steal you 30+ bags a year. There's a lot to love about Kyle Tucker and his profile, so I really don't think I need to sell you much as to what Kyle brings to the table if you are the New York Mets. But it really comes down to, again, is Kyle Tucker an exception for the New York Mets to get creative with contractability, or is he just going to kind of fall in the category as a guy that the Mets showed interest in, but they were never heavily in the market for if he was going beyond a couple years of high average annual value? Like, if he wanted more than an Alex Bregman structured contract at $120 million across 3 years, which is absurd AAV, and that is not something that I wanted, then maybe the Mets simply don't want to be involved at all. Is it possible that the Mets are going to reign supreme in the end? Possibly, but I'll say this: if the Mets do land Kyle Tucker in the end, I will be I said yesterday nothing will surprise me this offseason, but this will be the closest thing to it. Just because from how the trend of the offseason has been, do the Mets view Kyle Tucker as that dynamic of a player? I think he is. I think if you add him, you pair him with Juan Soto, and you have the two best outfielders from the past 2 years that have hit the open market in Flushing, Queens long term. That would not only bring the Mets immense value, that would help justify why you parted ways with Pete Alonso. And Kyle Tucker is still a better player overall than Pete Alonso. This is not a slight on Pete, but it's an absolute fact. Regardless on the lack of overall offensive success that Tucker may have had in stretches this past year, he's just such a more elite batter at the plate with his hand-eye ability and coordination, his ability to grind out at-bats to walks, and also his ability to lift and drive the baseball when you need it for a solid rate of 25 to 30 plus home runs this season. His offensive to defensive value continues to show, and while I think Bellinger is a better floor in what you're getting from a defensive value standpoint, offensively, I mean, what are we talking about here? Cody Bellinger is the guy. And before you say, but Bellinger had more home runs and RBIs this past year, that is true, but bear in mind where they were playing for half the year, from Wrigley versus what you have there in the Yankee Stadium. Bear in mind batting next to Aaron Judge versus having the depth that the Cubs had this past year. They're not the same thing, and I think that context is important. I also think it's important to note that Tucker's offensive numbers would probably still fluctuate in Queens, not just because of, not because of the big contract, but rather you're going to be in more of a pitcher's park half the year versus what you had the luxury of having in Houston for your half-decade plus span there. So a lot of interesting decisions that I hope and pray that we have actual answers to soon, because in the meantime, we're just still left in the dark as to what the Mets are fully going to do this offseason. We know they want outfielders. They know they want starters of quality. We know that they need more for the bullpen to round it up. But when are they going to make those moves, and to what degree? That is what we're still patiently, or really impatiently, I should be saying, awaiting to see what transpires. But the only thing else I got for you guys is that the Boston Red Sox may very well have Mr. Alex Bregman return. I did see, according to Buster Olney of ESPN, that the Red Sox apparently have a very aggressive and competitive offer in for Bregman. And I think Bregman's a solid fit to go back to Boston, too. I think, he obviously was looking for the longer-term deal, but he might just not get it exactly to his liking. Why not run it back with Boston, a team that was so willing to give you absurd AAV this past year? I'm sure is willing to do something similar, if not greater, moving forward. So we'll see what happens with Bregman, but Bo Bichette being a potential fallback plan for the Yankees leads me to believe that maybe they're already gearing up and preparing if Cody Bellinger signs elsewhere. Could that mean big news for the New York Mets? We'll just have to wait and see. Thank you guys again so much for watching. Let me know all your thoughts again in the comments down below as always. And this may be the final video that we have dropping for a little bit. If so, I hope you all have a tremendous first weekend there of the new year. But rest assured, if really significant news happens, even if the video is a little choppy or if I have to do a live stream on my phone or something, rest assured we will come out with that breaking news content if it is deemed best fit. Thank you again. And as always, no matter what, let's go Mets. Peace out, everybody.